Hello everyone, and welcome back to the second part of this video series. We will continue to analyze distinct elements that I believe can be utilized to create a fun and engaging video game level found from Nefarious City. In part 1, we discussed the level structure, examining the design and layout of the level's main pathway, as well as the design cues, discovering various methods to guide the player through the level's environment. With two other elements to further analyze and a specific scenario to examine where all the elements culminate together in, let's carry on and discuss the next major level element featured in this level. The third of the major four elements are the new game mechanics taught in this level. This section will focus on how the game teaches the main new mechanic presented in the game for the first time. There have been multiple different approaches on how a game teaches the player its various systems and rules. Sometimes, a game can be very meticulous with the way it presents itself with any new game information, and other times, a game can start with no instruction on what to do at all. These drastic differences in how to teach the player do work in varying ways, but the approach that is more seen in games is the method of teaching, testing, and challenging players. As the method's name implies, a scenario would be taught to the player where they have the chance to learn how to overcome it without consequence. Then, the player would be tested with an updated scenario that has added difficulty, ensuring they can overcome the newly presented trial. Finally, new variants of what was taught would constantly challenge the player in how they approach these scenarios throughout the rest of the game. This approach works especially well with helping the player learn the ropes of how to deal with the new obstacles that stand in their way over the game's runtime. I mention this approach specifically because analyzing Rift Apart's way that they teach an important new traversal mechanic is fascinating and takes cues from several methods that a game mechanic could be taught to the player. This mechanic is called the Omni Glove. It is a multi-purpose traversal tool that adds depth to the player's base movement and creates new platforming and exploration opportunities. While reaching a specific point in the main path, players reach a cutscene where the player is prompted to follow one of the supporting side characters where they visually demonstrate the Omni Glove's ability and how to overcome a newly presented obstacle. The player then regains control, and then with the help of a visual text prompt, gets taught how to use the Phantom Dash ability and how to pass these specialized door obstacles. As this is the only way to proceed forward, the game ensures that the player can perform this action successfully. Once the player passes the obstacle and gets taught the ability, they have a small enclosed area where they can practice what they have just learned for as long as they like. Throughout this whole tutorial process, along with any newly featured game mechanics introduced in this level, the game continues to highlight distinct teaching methods similarly seen like the process I just examined. This includes visual demonstrations, game slowdowns when performing a new action for the first time, audio lines, and visual text prompts to act as a secondary method into teaching these new mechanics. By following the path forward, the player is presented with multiple altered scenarios of needing to cross large gaps, utilizing the Omni Glove's various abilities. A great touch is that if the player fails to make the first jump properly, they will land on a platform below where they can easily make it back up and try again. This lets the players learn from their mistakes rather than punish them for it. The player then gets tested by removing the platform placed below the gap, in hopes that the player can make the jump successfully. From passing the previous testing scenario, the wall run introductory segment purposefully doesn't feature any safety platforms if the player fails the jump, as this is how most of these segments will appear throughout the game when they are present. To now test the player by using both newly learned skills together, the game presents a scenario where the player will need to jump to a wall run panel, jump from it, and then Phantom Dash to the platform ahead. From this point, the rest of the game's presented scenarios revolving around the Omni Glove's abilities will act as the challenge portion of the method the player will eventually face and strive to overcome. I believe that the way the Omni Glove was taught was effective and paced greatly. It gave the player time and space to fully understand what was just taught with secondary teaching methods to help support the main method through playing. However, if there was a chance I helped design this segment, I would space out the platform gaps a bit more where at least the first scenario cannot be reached without the Phantom Dash's aerial horizontal movement. During multiple of my own playthroughs, I always thought these gaps were spaced out farther apart, but to my surprise, these segments can be crossed through double jumping and hovering alone. I was curious, and after watching a few of the other playthroughs on YouTube, none of the other players approached these segments differently either. I would argue the teaching methods were so effective that players instinctively used these newly taught mechanics to overcome these later challenges instead of using the abilities they are already accustomed to. This process of allowing players different choices with how to approach more linear gameplay scenarios within their design is very impressive. It ties back to the quote shown at the start of the video, where the team wanted to make the game tailor-made for each player's individual experience playing as best as they could. The fourth of the major four elements is how the level rewards curiosity. This section will focus on the significance of rewarding players by exploring the environment and examining how certain collectibles are utilized throughout it. When playing a level that has secrets available to find, players will be curious as to how they will be rewarded for their discovery. It's important to consider the design of these side paths, as they not only help decide the type of reward the player will be given for their efforts, but also add general enjoyment and a sense of challenge to make that reward feel like it was worth their time. When executed properly, side pathways and discoverable secrets can easily add more depth and replayability to a level, surprising the player with not just a beneficial reward, but also more new quality designed content. This could include creating paths that feature imaginative gameplay scenarios and challenges, interesting narrative moments, atmospheric audio, and captivating environment design with potential new landmark locations. Even though these pathways are optional, they shouldn't be completely overlooked by designers and should instead be treated with care, as they could be just as significant to players as other moments and objectives found within the game. In addition, these pathways can unlock useful rewards that could be utilized throughout the rest of the levels. This helps with the general feeling of progression within a game, letting the players feel like they are advancing and being rewarded for it through gameplay. In these pathways, designers are given the chance to expand their ideas and make the players feel that these sections were the reward itself, making them want to keep discovering new locations when they find them throughout the rest of the game. Nefarious City features a defined larger side pathway and multiple scattered smaller ones with hidden secrets. Since each pathway leads back to the bazaar, these secrets, if missed, are easy to go back to and are fun to discover. When it comes to major side objectives within a game, I would consider the Nefarious Business Factory in this overall side pathway as a notable example. There are multiple instances in which a player could take to discover this pathway, allowing the player to find it in their own way without it being a chore for them. Players could have discovered it through exploration, checking the map, or through the audio cue I highlighted in the previous video. To begin with the obvious, the visuals of this new landmark location easily stand out from what has been presented throughout the rest of the level, featuring this amazingly detailed factory setting to take in. This complete change in environment really helps add more depth to the level, surprising the player for discovering it and keeping them immersed. As I talked about the concept more in depth in the last video, the factory also has a consistent balance of the core gameplay pillars. This path includes engaging platforming scenarios where the player must use the conveyor belts and box objects together to cross different obstacles, making them think more on their feet. Narrative moments are subtle, listening to Ratchet and the NPCs react to the environment and the objective itself, which help to not slow down the pathway's pacing. Combat helps transition each of the major platforming scenarios until the end of the pathway, where players reach a newly designed arena layout, allowing for unique choices the player can make on how they want to defeat all the enemies, giving them a satisfying conclusion to this side pathway's journey. The factory has a few secrets and collectibles to find, which adds depth to how the level can be explored. The placement of them varies, depending on their rarity, where collecting or finding them feels earned. Through traveling this pathway, the player gets rewarded by unlocking a piece of a powerful in-game weapon called the Rhino, where they need to find the rest of the individual pieces scattered throughout the rest of the levels to unlock the full weapon. This is a great reward for this path, as it's a longer designed area that makes the reward feel more earned due to the effort the player put in and the challenges that were eventually conquered. A simple method seen in games to help reward curiosity is to spread common collectibles in various parts across a level. This can be used either as a tool to help guide players to new locations or to add depth to create more interactable environments. Nefarious City takes the approach of spreading its common collectible, the various breakable box objects, across the level. The boxes slightly stray off the various main pathway trails and environments. Since the boxes give the player more of the actual in-game currency when they are broken, allows for a natural sense of game progression where the player can keep collecting these currencies to stay invested in wanting to buy and upgrade more weapons from the shops. Taking the time to explore the environment and stray from the main path will also benefit players with more common collectibles to be found, rewarding them even more for finding these hidden placements through their curiosity alone. These two different approaches that these playstyles offer still allow for each side to keep having fun, not limiting either one from staying engaged with the game's shop system. Also, as a side point to how boxes are placed throughout the level's environment, certain layouts are specifically placed in areas that would be beneficial to the player. An example of this is how ammo crates could be seen before, during, or after major combat sections. Or how TNT boxes can be used as an environmental hazard for not just enemies, but also a quick way of breaking a large stack of boxes. This acts as a hidden game mechanic where players utilize different approaches to interact with their surroundings, which is called a game dynamic. Having designated layouts for collectibles, both commonly found and rare, is significant in how designers want the flow of the level to proceed, ensuring that it is both useful and rewarding for the player to interact with. To briefly summarize the level elements analyzed in this video, using effective teaching methods to introduce new gameplay mechanics will allow players to clearly understand its functionality, and instinctively apply it to newly presented scenarios throughout the rest of the game. Also, rewarding the player's curiosity for taking the time to explore the level allows them to potentially discover quality new locations, find meaningful collectibles, or both, making their efforts worthwhile and enjoyable. With that, each of the major 4 elements have been covered. Before I wrap up the video, I want to analyze one last specific scenario where all these elements can be seen. Let me introduce the Nefarious Day Spa. After going through the main pathway and receiving the Omni Glove, players are shown through the narrative and cutscenes about the next location they need to travel towards. Once reached, the player will then have access to traveling through this vast, designed combat arena with multiple level layers and obstacles for the player to interact with, allowing for player freedom in how they want to traverse the environment, while also clearing out all the enemies needed to progress forward. Before actively starting this objective, this landmark location gets introduced with a camera pan around the environment, showing off the major defined areas and visual details of the scenario, with audio dialogue explaining how the scenario will occur. A quick nice visual detail is how the steamed hot springs are presented, emitting this bubbling steam effect, giving off a sense of danger. It also shows that only robots are submerged within it, since they can withstand these higher temperatures compared to other characters like Ratchet. While playing through this scenario, the level design presents areas for the player to utilize the newly learned game mechanics and challenge them while both platforming and fighting in combat. Since enemies are always moving, the player has access to multiple separate ways of testing their knowledge of how to use these abilities. This includes using rift tethers or wall run panels to cross large distances, as well as performing the Phantom Dash to platform to different areas or dodge enemy attacks. Also, the mix of enemies presented are varied, challenging the player to think of new ways to approach combat. As players are fighting their way through this objective and move through their surroundings, they will discover varied box placements found within the environment, rewarding players with needed weapon ammunition and common currencies for going out of their way to break them. This is how each element works together, all for one major purpose of delivering an engaging and memorable slice of gameplay, culminating in everything the player has experienced up to this point of the level. With each element explained, I believe we can all learn something from how this level was fully designed. Ever since I first played it back when the game was released, I always knew there was something special about it, and I am thankful to have been given the chance to explain why. If you enjoyed watching this series, I recommend checking some of my fellow classmates' content found here on this channel. This was Jacob Giannone from Centennial College's Game Development Program, and thanks for watching.